On October 27, 2025, at 2:36 a.m., the skies over eastern Ukraine were heavy with fog, the kind that swallows light and sound. Near the town of Dobropillia in Donetsk Oblast, sensors flickered to life. Moments later, the faint grind of engines echoed through the mist. What appeared at first as movement on the radar soon revealed itself. A full-scale Russian armored assault, 29 vehicles strong, pushing toward the Ukrainian-held settlements of Shakhove and Volodymyrivka. The first wave advanced in tight formations, tanks and BMPs crawling through mined fields under the cover of darkness. Russian commanders split the assault into smaller groups of 4 to 5 vehicles, each taking a different route in an attempt to stretch Ukraine's defenses thin. The weather was meant to help them. Low clouds and rain-distorted drone feeds, making the night sky blind. But on the ground, Ukrainian artillery teams were already awake, locked in, and waiting. When the strike began, the horizon erupted in light. Artillery shells, FPV drones, and anti-tank fire turned the fields into a furnace. For more than 6 hours, the battle raged. Machine against machine, precision against persistence. By dawn, the smoke cleared over a shattered column of Russian armor. 15 vehicles were left burning, their crews scattered. It was one of the largest mechanized assaults in recent months. And though it failed to break through, it raised a question echoing across Donetsk. How many more nights like this are still to come? Let me walk you through the entire incident, so you know exactly what happened. At 12 a.m., Dobropillia slept under a heavy sky. The streets were still, the only movement coming from trees bending softly to the wind. But just outside the town, the silence carried weight, a warning of something approaching. Ukrainian outposts along the eastern perimeter began noticing faint, rhythmic, distant mechanical vibrations through the ground. For many soldiers, that kind of hum meant one thing: armor. In the next 30 minutes, observation posts reported irregular heat signatures east of Shakhove. It wasn't the usual reconnaissance patrol. The thermal outlines were too dense, too steady, and spread across multiple directions. Inside the Ukrainian command post, officers leaned over glowing screens, tracing red markers forming in clusters. It soon became clear that Russia was staging something larger than a probing assault. At 12:47 a.m., engines began to roar across the lowlands. In the darkness, Russian armored vehicles advanced in waves. Tanks and BMPs arranged in tight groups of 4 to 5. They were trying to disguise formation patterns, splitting routes, and staggering timings so that radar wouldn't pick up a whole convoy at once. Their goal was precision through confusion, a coordinated strike through fragmented movement. The defenders had seen this tactic before. The Ukrainian forces in Dobropillia had spent weeks fortifying their lines, laying mines along access routes, setting up observation trenches, and installing early warning sensors. The terrain had become part of their defense, with ditches, low ridges, and the mud itself working in their favor. Behind those fortifications, artillery crews of the 1st Azov Corps waited quietly for coordinates. Within the next hour or so, the sound of engines had grown into a constant vibration beneath the ground. Light rain began to fall, blurring visibility, something the Russians had hoped would reduce Ukraine's drone reconnaissance. But the weather had never stopped these operators before. In an improvised command truck, screens flickered with grainy thermal footage of vehicles inching closer to the front line. At 1:23 a.m., Ukrainian sensors confirmed contact. The first armored line entered firing range. Commands moved quickly through encrypted radio channels, and artillery batteries adjusted positions. Within minutes, the night sky lit up. The first shell struck behind the leading tank, followed by another that hit directly. Fire burst upward, illuminating the outlines of vehicles as they spread apart in panic. In that moment, the front came alive. The battle's rhythm took shape between 1:30 and 2 a.m., when Ukrainian gunners began establishing control. Artillery fire fell in patterned intervals, forcing Russian columns to scatter and slow down. In the confusion, infantry dismounted and attempted to advance on foot, but visibility was low and the terrain turned to thick mud. Every meter gained came at the cost of exposure. Ukrainian thermal drones tracked each heat signal, crawling through the fields. Within the bracket of the next 10 minutes, estimatedly at 2:13 a.m., the Russians attempted a flanking maneuver toward Volodymyrivka. The move had likely been planned as a backup route, one meant to bypass direct Ukrainian artillery fire. But the path had been mined days earlier, and when the first tank rolled over, the explosion tore through the column. Fire and smoke shot high into the sky, marking the failure of their alternate route. The Ukrainian command center at Dobropillia continued issuing orders steadily. Even under bombardment, their coordination stayed tight. Every artillery response was measured. No rounds were wasted. By 2:25 a.m., they had effectively trapped the assault within a semicircle of defensive fire, limiting any possible escape route west. At 2:30 a.m., the Russians switched tactics. They launched signal flares into the air, illuminating the entire battlefield. For a moment, the dark plains turned orange, revealing both sides. Tanks, armored carriers, and figures moving through haze came into full view. It was supposed to help their coordination, but the light worked both ways. Ukrainian artillery crews used the glow to fine-tune their aim. It took Ukraine 15 minutes to grasp the dynamics of this attack. By 2:45 a.m., the defenders had turned the enemy's visibility advantage against them. Explosions rippled in even intervals across the front, targeting engines and rear armor first, immobilizing vehicles before destroying them. The coordination was methodical, honed through months of similar night assaults. Next, the drones joined in. Ukraine's unmanned systems force released a swarm of FPV and reconnaissance drones from concealed positions west of Dobropillia. They flew low, zigzagging between tracer rounds. Some carried explosives designed for direct strikes on moving targets. Others streamed real-time thermal footage to gunners below. Together, they painted an aerial map of chaos. The Russians fired upward blindly, trying to bring down the swarm. Tracers cut through the mist, but the drones kept advancing, some striking open hatches or fuel compartments. Each small explosion created shock and confusion, making coordination almost impossible. When the clock struck 3:22 a.m., the Ukrainian command noted a clear shift. The enemy formation was breaking apart. The armored advance had lost its structure. Infantry squads had scattered across the fields, and communication between Russian units had nearly collapsed. Attempts to regroup were intercepted by Ukrainian artillery fire that struck thermal clusters detected by drones. Between 3:30 and 3:50 a.m., the battle entered its most chaotic phase. Smoke drifted across trenches, rain mixed with soot, and the visibility dropped to near zero. The Russians tried one more coordinated push from the east, sending in a second armored column. They believed Ukraine's artillery needed time to reload. But as soon as they emerged, the defenders unleashed a counter-barrage from behind a nearby ridge. The timing was near perfect. Shells landed in rapid sequence, cutting through the second wave before it could close the gap. By 4 a.m., the landscape looked like a burning mosaic of twisted steel and shattered soil. The Russians tried to dismount and fight on foot, but the defenders had entrenched positions. Ukrainian troops from the National Guard's 1st Azov Corps held their trenches with machine guns and portable anti-tank weapons, fighting at ranges so close they could feel the shockwave of their own grenades. The mud slowed everything. Tanks slipped, soldiers stumbled, and vehicles got stuck mid-field. That natural friction gave Ukrainian fighters enough time to rearm and rotate. Their system of trenches had been engineered with escape tunnels and crosslinks, allowing soldiers to shift positions under fire. Within the next half an hour, the rain shifted to a light drizzle. It was 4:30 a.m., and exhaustion started creeping into both sides. The Russians paused briefly to regroup, and the field fell almost silent except for the crackle of burning metal. For many soldiers, this silence was more frightening than the explosions. It was the pause before another wave. Sure enough, by 5 a.m., fresh armor appeared from the east, the final attempt to push through. The vehicles moved fast and low, trying to take advantage of reduced drone visibility in the mist. But the Ukrainian operators were already tracking them, using residual heat signatures. The artillery batteries switched to what officers later called Sequence 3, a rapid-fire formation designed for concentrated suppression. The counterstrike landed within seconds of detection. A curtain of fire swept across the field, catching the new wave before it reached the Ukrainian line. One by one, the armored vehicles erupted in flames. Those that survived turned back east, retreating toward their original staging zone. By 5:20 a.m., the battle had decisively turned. At 5:30 a.m., dawn began breaking. The first light of day revealed what the darkness had hidden. The blackened shells of Russian armor scattered across the plains, trails of smoke curling upward. Ukrainian soldiers emerged slowly from their trenches, soaked, mud-stained, and silent. Many hadn't slept for more than a day. They began moving through the wreckage, checking for mines and ensuring no stragglers remained. By 5:45 a.m., medics reached the forward positions and tended to the wounded. Supplies were distributed, and stretchers were carried between trenches. Despite fatigue, the defenders maintained discipline, scanning the horizon for any remaining movement. The adrenaline hadn't yet worn off. The mop-up operation was then ordered and began. It was around 6 a.m. when FPV drones patrolled overhead, scanning for surviving enemy positions. Occasional detonations echoed as drones neutralized scattered infantry groups hiding in nearby tree lines. The coordination between air and ground units remained tight even after victory. Within the next 15 minutes, reports started reaching the regional command center. 15 Russian vehicles destroyed, including 2 tanks, 12 armored carriers, and 1 light truck. Enemy infantry losses were still being counted, with drones continuing to strike at isolated targets. The smoke lingered across the horizon, hanging low and thick. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows over the battlefield. The town of Dobropillia stood untouched behind the front line, its rooftops catching morning light like a quiet symbol of endurance. At 6:45 a.m., soldiers began collecting ammunition casings and salvaging usable equipment from abandoned Russian vehicles. Engineers worked to repair communication lines cut overnight. Officers reviewed live drone feeds to ensure the area was fully secure. Every image on the screen showed the same thing: silence where chaos had been. By 7 a.m., Ukrainian flags were visible again above trench posts. Some soldiers poured steaming coffee from battered thermos flasks, sitting briefly against the earth walls they had defended all night. No celebration followed, only quiet relief. For many, the noise of engines and explosions still echoed faintly in their ears. Approximately 15 to 20 minutes later, the last FPV drone returned to base. Its onboard camera captured one final panoramic view: the blackened field, the scattered metal, and the faint outlines of soldiers walking among smoke. The recording ended with the words that later echoed through Ukrainian news broadcasts: "Dobropillia stands." In the next hour, the battle was officially declared over. The defense line remained intact, and the enemy retreat was confirmed. The operation report marked the engagement as one of the largest mechanized assaults repelled in recent months. Yet for those who fought through the night, the numbers mattered less than the silence that followed, the stillness of a land that had refused to fall. By 1:15 p.m., the last sounds of artillery faded over Dobropillia. Smoke rose in thin columns from the fields near Shakhove, mixing with fog until the horizon blurred into gray. Ukrainian soldiers moved carefully through the wreckage, clearing what the morning had left behind. Broken armor still smoldered, and twisted tracks were half buried in mud. The engineers began their sweep half an hour later, at 1:43 p.m., checking for unexploded mines, scanning for signs of retreating infantry. The air smelled of burnt fuel and wet soil. What had started as a storm of metal had ended in an eerie calm, the kind that made even victory feel heavy. At exactly 2:10 p.m., confirmation came from the command post: the assault was fully repelled. The positions at Shakhove and Volodymyrivka are still held. Across radio channels, small bursts of quiet relief echoed. Not cheers, just exhausted acknowledgments. Ukraine had endured one of the largest mechanized attacks in recent weeks and held every inch of ground. The drone operators replayed footage from the morning. The same terrain that had been crawling with armor now showed fields littered with wrecks. 2 tanks destroyed, 12 armored fighting vehicles gone, and a light vehicle abandoned near a crater. For every loss counted in steel. Some lives hadn't been taken. A silent victory in a war that measures progress in survival. By late afternoon, the soldiers rested behind sandbags, helmets beside them, watching the smoke drift east. For now, the line at Dobropillia was safe, but everyone knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. In this war, calm was just the pause before the next wave. As the smoke cleared over Dobropillia, The silence felt heavier than the gunfire that came before it. The town stood broken, but it was still free. This was proof that courage can hold its ground even against machines. Each soldier who fought that night didn't just defend a place, they defended a story, one that refuses to end. Moments like this remind us what bravery looks like in real time. If this breakdown helped you see the battle beyond the headlines, hit subscribe, stay tuned, and keep watching, because Ukraine's fight for tomorrow is still being written tonight.